Hi, everyone. I'm Becca, and this is How I Got Hired. How I Got Hired is a series of interviews where product managers share how they landed great product roles, from PMs who made a career pivot to those with more formal training. How I Got Hired captures the various ways to open doors in the world of product. We'll be talking about each guest's recipe for success, what motivated them to get into product, how they prepared for the interview, and what they did to set themselves apart. Today, my guest is Hunter Guerin. Hunter is the founder of Llama Wood, the world's first on-demand firewood delivery marketplace. Before that, Hunter spent 4.5 years in various product roles at Xometry, which is an online marketplace for custom manufactured parts. Hunter, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
So great to have you. So Hunter and I work together at Xometry. So we'll be telling the story of how Hunter got hired there on today's show. But before we get into that story, we wanted to kick things off with a little icebreaker. So, Hunter, are you ready for two truths and a lie?
I am ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Many of these, when I was thinking about ideas, I feel like so
I
I
know. I
made
was
it
thinking this
extra
too.
difficult and basically took almost all true stories that you
Tweak them a
probably
little.
know and just tweaked a little bit of it. So if you figure this one out, I'll be impressed. All right,
I
here we go.
appreciate the warning. Okay.
So two truths and a lie. First, so I am from Birmingham, Alabama. That is absolutely true. I'm not lying about that. I'm from Birmingham, and Michael Jordan, when I was, I don't know, below maybe 15 or something, stopped playing for the Chicago Bulls and started playing baseball for the Birmingham Barons. And so I was at the first game that he hit a home run. I actually caught the home run ball. Number two, my daughter was born in the front seat of my 4Runner while driving to the hospital to have her at a hospital. And number three is I was the first person on Earth to hold a camera that had just been brought down from the International Space Station.
Wow. All of those are kind of wild. Okay. At first I thought the first one was going to be like a sports trivia question. I was like, why are you doing this to me? But that one feels the most like a lie to me.
So the catching Michael Jordan's
Yeah.
home run. Yeah, you are correct.
Yes.
I was at the game, but I did not.
Wow.
I did not catch the home run.
And that was kind of my thought. Or it was like, what are the chances that you would catch a home run ball?
You're good.
But
You're good.
I thought maybe the gotcha would be that Katie actually gave birth in the back seat of your car, because I do kind of remember that story, and I was like, was that the one little tweak? But
yeah, I thought about making that tweak, but because I think you knew the story of the car birth, so
infamous.
But yeah,
that's amazing. Okay, I kind of went like a similar. I think these are all going to feel very true. All right. Number one, I have a British passport. Number two, I can speak with a British accent. Number three, I was born in Italy.
Okay, I absolutely know you can speak with a British accent because I've heard it and it is hilarious. Born in Italy. I think I'm gonna put that one as the lie because I thought you were born in Alaska.
Good try. But no. I was in fact born in Italy. My dad was stationed at the Air Force Base there. The lie is that I don't have a British passport.
Yeah, that's tough.
I know it was kind of hiding in plain sight, you'd think.
Yeah.
British accent, British
With that accent,
passport.
I thought it was.
Yeah.
Thought you were legit.
Maybe I'll get one, but no. Um, well, I feel like
That's
even
good.
though we've been friends for a while, we're always learning something new.
Born in Italy. Where in Italy?
um, so I was born in a place called Pordenone, which is near. My dad was stationed at Aviano Air Force Base, which is like northern Italy.
Cool.
Yeah, we went back as a family when I was like a little kid, and I only like all I remember is like having gelato and thinking this is the best ice cream in the entire world. Like
Yeah.
what is this? But yeah, pretty cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, let's get into kind of the heart of the matter, why we're here today to talk about your unique journey into product. I love this story. When I was thinking about who I wanted on the show, I thought of you right away. I thought you would be such a great guest. And I'm excited not only to talk about how you got into product, but then kind of your path to becoming an entrepreneur as well. Um, so let's start at the beginning. So in talking about how you ended up joining Xometry as a product manager, let's rewind a little bit from there. Where were you just before that? What were you doing before you interviewed at Xometry?
Yeah. So this goes with my third truth. I was a mechanical engineer for an aerospace and defense contractor for a little over 9 years. And that particular story, the company had made a unit, electronics unit that flew on the International Space Station before I got there. And kind of early on, I did a lot of work in clean rooms. I did analysis, mechanical and structural and thermal was kind of the main job. But this touches on some probably later questions. But I really enjoyed the physical, like working with the physical parts as opposed to the CAD model or in sort of analysis world, which is all theoretical. So any chance I had to go into a clean room and like touch a piece of hardware, I would. And so I just went over with my boss to the place where they had brought this camera back, and we all were in the clean room. And somehow I started holding the box, and they had to take like pieces off of it in order for them to get inside and get the data that they were trying to get. It was a scientific instrument, and I ended up just holding it, and then as soon as they took like the support piece off, it was just like in my hands. And so I was kind of holding this electronics unit, and everybody in the room just simultaneously said, "Don't drop it." And so I quickly like put it down.
No
But yeah,
pressure.
I was a mechanical engineer doing structural and thermal analysis on aerospace and space flight and airborne electronics units.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, and it was my only job. I worked there right out of college. I got a mechanical engineering degree from Clemson, and then immediately moved to DC and started working for this company. It was a great company, and I loved it. Learned a ton every day. So I never really needed to go anywhere else because it was such a great job. So I'd been there about a little over 9 years, I believe.
And so during those 9 years, like, did you have a thought in the back of your mind that you were like kind of interested in tech, or product specifically? Were there any kind of seeds of that during that time?
Yeah. So I started that job in 2008. And then my wife and I went to the Bahamas, and I read a book on the beach there called The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and immediately became obsessed with starting my own business. So 2012 is when like the idea to start a business kind of was planted in me. And then around 2016, my brother took a job at a startup in Silicon Valley. He was the head of data science. And so I started hearing about software businesses and his stories, and I started getting intrigued with software businesses. But I actually had no idea what product management was. So I'd never, while a mechanical engineer, I didn't necessarily dream of becoming a product manager.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know it existed. I was interested in software sales because one thing I learned while being a mechanical engineer is I actually loved to present to customers. I liked to talk to customers, and I liked this sort of physical work. And so, I was interested in starting a business, but in terms of like new experiences that I wanted to gain, I was interested in sales, and I was interested in software development in general, the development practices, and sort of this idea of like trying things and crashing and trying it again and crashing and moving really fast. And so, no idea what product management was, which I think that comes later in my story. But I was definitely interested in like software development businesses.
Yeah. And so how did you stumble across Xometry?
So about that time in 2016, I became interested in software businesses. So I started talking to people about, what was out there and just learning more. And one of my friends actually had this relationship with this guy as kind of a unique way of her knowing him. She was at a VC firm that had invited this founder named Randy to some event. I can't remember what it was, but so she had like dealt with this founder for this VC firm, and then she also previously worked on Capitol Hill and knew Randy because he had a political kind of history, and so she kind of knew this guy and told me about this startup that was doing something, she didn't know a ton of the details, but it was doing something for manufacturing and like in the mechanical engineering space. And so I was like, oh, cool. I'd love to connect with him. So she connected us, and I really connected with him because I was interested in talking to him about what it was like to start a company and how he had those questions with his wife and how he left, a comfortable job to go start a business. He had actually started businesses before that, but it was really a call to learn more about his entrepreneurial journey. Actually, at the time, I had no interest in like jumping to Xometry. I just wanted to meet Randy.
Right.
So once we got connected, then that was sort of the beginning of my journey to Xometry.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that like one thing I've heard from other guests that I've had on the show, and one thing that I've seen to be true in my own experience, is just like so much can come from these just like, I don't know, casual conversations. And I think
Absolutely.
approaching your career with a sense of just natural curiosity and hearing people's stories. And, I think sometimes when a lot of what we're exposed to is kind of the same set of like super success stories, right? Like how did Elon Musk get to where he is, or Jeff Bezos, or whatever. You forget that like there's people in our midst that have achieved incredible success, and the path can just look so different. And what a cool opportunity to be able to just have a conversation with someone like Randy and understand his story as an entrepreneur. So
Yeah,
it's super cool. So how?
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say, this podcast is called How I Got Hired. So I feel obligated to sort of share this, is that, of course, like I've talked to many people since getting that job. I'd only had one job, so I was no expert in getting a new job. But I've, from that experience and then many, many future experiences, learned the valuable lesson of if you ask somebody for advice, this saying goes, if you ask somebody for advice, they'll give you money. If you ask for money, they give you advice. So maybe if you ask for advice, they give you a job. Might be the situation with the Randy.
Yeah.
But that's, if anybody asks me how to get a job in product, or talking about how to, I'm trying to figure out where my passion is, and I don't know what I want to do. So just find some people that are doing cool things and ask them for advice. So how'd you get there? And that will start a snowball for sure.
Yeah. And that in and of itself, right? Like part of being a good product person is asking good questions and being curious. So like it's kind of, a little bit meta, but like just by doing that, you're kind of displaying the types of skills that make for a good product person. So yeah, it kind of comes full circle. So how did these conversations then progress to, hey, you asked for advice, but here, how about a job?
Yeah. So I remember this like it was yesterday because it's kind of funny. So we connected in 2016, probably early 2016. And so I emailed Randy, and after getting connected, I said, I'd love to meet, but I'm about to go on a sabbatical for 7 weeks. So let me ping you when I get back. And, so I was going to try to go into Xometry office in Gaithersburg and meet him in person. That it didn't happen. We got on a phone call, and I happened to be coming back I had done some work at NASA Goddard that day. Mm-hmm. So I was able, he's like, where are you, Hunter? I was like, well, I'm just coming back from NASA. So kind of a surreal thing to be able to say to somebody that runs a manufacturing business that sort of, targets aerospace and defense customers. But so, I just sort of asked him some of those questions. I'm interested in learning about how you decided to make the jump, and also why did you start this business in the DC area? A lot of people start startups out in Silicon Valley or whatever, some of these other known tech hubs, but he started this company in Gaithersburg, Maryland. So I was curious about that. And he eventually said, what's your purpose on this call? And I said, well, I'm just trying to learn because I'd love to one day start a business. I think it's really interesting to me. With a mechanical engineering background, I am interested in businesses that have a mechanical, or sort of, like I said earlier, physical product, but they sell it via an e-commerce platform, that you're able to sort of test and then make modifications to the physical product. I think I later learned that this process is called agile software development, but it's basically, trying to put out an MVP and get feedback and update. And then also, since we live in this digital world, we're able to, sort of figure out quickly whether there's demand for this product. So at the time I was creating landing pages and these simple Google ads to drive traffic towards these various products that I was messing around with. And I guess, we can go deeper into some of that stuff, but I was sort of explaining those things, and that I was really customer focused. I learned that, as a mechanical engineer, you have to be very detail oriented. And a lot of times you can get kind of siloed into a specific piece of a bigger system. And I always was really interested in the larger system and talking to customers about it and hearing their needs and presenting what we had built to them and answering questions, et cetera. So he said, there's this job called product management. This gets to how I learned about product management. Mm-hmm. And I think we're looking for somebody right now, and you're a mechanical engineer, and it might be something that you'd be interested in. And if you send me your resume, I'll shoot it over to the right people and we can kind of take it from there. So that was basically my intro to product. And then I sent him my resume, and then did you mention, I think, okay, did you ask about the interview or not yet?
No, that's kind of my next question, but I was just smiling, thinking about Randy being the person to introduce you to the concept of product management.
Yes.
But that's awesome that, he heard what you were saying and kind of connected the dots and
Yeah.
realized that that would be such a great way for you to learn a lot of those things that you were describing, and maybe at that point didn't even really have like the vocabulary to you know, like communicate in a succinct way, but to kind of hear that and say like, oh, maybe give this product thing a try. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you actually reminded me of something. Again, how I got hired. I was thinking about the funny thing is on that call, talking to Randy about starting a business. I think one of the first things he said is, "Well, if you want to start a business, you definitely can't take 7 weeks off going to Argentina." And I say, "Well, that's why I did it before." But the other thing about getting hired, I think, is he in that conversation, I don't think he asked me anything really about what I did professionally. I mean, he knew I was a mechanical engineer. He knew I was coming home from NASA. But it was that vacation, I think, that like potentially made me sound like somebody worth, or at a minimum, just it stuck out in his mind about this random guy who called him that had just gotten back from Argentina. And, I was thinking about like, somebody says this, that like a lot of times when you're interviewing, like a sabbatical or like a crazy trip is something worth putting on your resume, because the people you're talking to might become more interested in that trip than they are in like what you've done professionally. So that's sort of my plug to say, don't be afraid to sort of like highlight some weird, like funny things about you in your resume so that you stand out additionally to the, accomplishments you've had in the past. But
Yeah. Well, and on that note too, I this is potentially a topic for a whole nother discussion, but I feel like you have always been a really strong advocate for sabbaticals. And I remember at Xometry, kind of when you were gearing up to go on the sabbatical then, uh, y- you know, when you had first mentioned the idea to me, I was like, oh my God, like, you can't just go on a sabbatical. Like, how do you, and you were just like, well, just ask. Like, like, so I think so many people just don't even like talk themselves out of it immediately.
yeah,
And I remember that conversation and thinking like, yeah, good point. Like, why not just ask? And, I think you've always been very thoughtful in presenting, a good case for it, right? Of like, here's here's how I'm gonna make sure that my work is covered and that it's not disruptive to the business and all of these things. And I think there's certainly this kind of theme in your career where these sabbaticals have been really transformative for you. And yeah, I think you're I consider you at least a bit of a thought leader in that regard. So
awesome. I like to hear that. Well, but when you interview me on how I took a sabbatical podcast,
yeah, we'll go in deeper on that. Okay, so Randy says, "Hey, maybe think about this whole product thing." And then we had an opening at the time. You came in and interviewed. What was that process like, preparing for an interview for a job that you didn't know was a thing not that
yeah,
long ago?
yeah, well, the first thing that I did, probably even before getting the invite to interview, is I'd become interested in Xometry, and I was kind of curious what it was all about. So we were working on something at the time, and I was designing this fairly simple part that was not sort of mission critical. So it was not super expensive. And in engineering companies, a lot of times, like in many procurement companies, if something's over like $2,000, it has to go to the purchasing department, and you have to get multiple bids and everything. But if you're just making a little like prototype or trying to make something for a test fixture, which is actually what I was doing, the engineer can submit requests to manufacturers, and then basically purchase it. And so I needed to manufacture this thing, and I said, well, let me give Xometry a try. So Xometry, real quick, for anyone listening, is a on-demand marketplace for custom manufacturing, and you could upload a CAD file. It would generate a predicted price to manufacture and the lead time and the price to manufacture, and then it spits out a price, and you can just buy online. And so,
And this was pretty revolutionary
yeah,
because the historical process for doing so would involve like
yeah,
turning your CAD file, which is kind of a 3D design rendering, into a two-dimensional like PDF drawing, and then sending that drawing to a bunch of machine shops, and then they give you prices back, and you don't know really how they came up with that price. It can be wildly different, and there's just a lot of back and forth. It's a very antiquated process.
yeah,
And so if you imagine, for Xometry, this experience that Hunter's describing, uploading a file and knowing instantaneously what it could cost you to have that manufactured was a pretty big deal.
yeah, exactly. And when I was doing this at the time, it was fairly common to for a few companies out there for you to be able to upload a CAD file and get the price to print 3D print, because that's super fairly simple. It's just volume of material plus like the time it takes the printer to print it. So it's fairly easy formula. The sort of revolutionary thing I think at the time for Xometry was that they were doing that, but for CNC machining. And so I actually thought, just through the experience and using the website, that Xometry was basically just a really optimized machine shop in Gaithersburg, Maryland, that allowed you to upload CAD files and get a price. And then you would buy and they would make it and they would ship it to you. That was sort of my impression when I first did the test. So as an engineer, I had a couple of things that I was interested in. Number one is like making sure that it was going to be a reputable seller manufacturer. If I was going to then kind of push that design or that quote onto procurement and say, hey, can I buy this? I needed to be sure it was going to work. So going through the process, I was attempting to generate an output from Xometry's app that I could share with our procurement and my boss. And so I had some interesting sort of struggles through the process, and we ended up not buying the thing. So unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have the like start to finish experience of Xometry. But then I think looking at like the job description, it's like understand customer requirements and solve problems that people don't even know they have, and manage a list of features in a roadmap. So it was looking at the job description. At the time, I was a mechanical engineer, so I like to say that I was like a hardware product developer or product manager, and then all of a sudden I was looking to go into software product management. So I was able to link those two together and come up with sort of like, here's how I approach the process of creating something from scratch or defining a specification. That was really big. And then, so preparing for the interview, just sort of matching that mechanical engineering experience to product management experience. And then also, I think that there was a question, I either got access to it before the interview or they asked me in the interview, but it was what app do you use? I think this is a pretty common product
Yes.
management question. What app do you use and love? And like, tell us why. And then what would you do to change it and make it better, et cetera. So I'd sort of prepared that.
Wait, what app did you talk about?
I talked about Joule, which is an app from Chef Steps, and it controls a at-home sous vide
Oh,
stick.
yes.
And I love that app. I still love it to this day. And the thing that bothered me is, for some reason, if you the Joule doesn't have a power button, so you basically just like plug it in and unplug it. And if you unplug it without turning it off via the app, the next time you log in, you get this weird alert warning message that's like, Julie didn't turn off correctly, and there's Wi-Fi issues. And I never actually figured out how to get that to not show up. And so that was the thing that I was going to change, is somehow help the user figure out why they're getting this error message. But I don't know that was the best answer for that interview question, but
But I mean, I think just having thought about that, and I think it's good advice for anyone going into a product interview, that like a very common thing to ask about is like, what are some of your experiences with products, and like let's unpack that, right? And so um I think that's a question that you can answer off the cuff, fairly well, but it is something that's nice if you anticipate it and you can think through, well, what's a good example of something that I use and love, and I could give some thoughtful reasons why, and what are some things that I would change about it and why. Like, that's just kind of some basic stuff, but to be prepared with that kind of answer, I would have to assume, I know, having been a part of a number of product manager interviews, we almost always ask a question like that, right? Because it's, you want to just get the basics of like, how does somebody think about the products that they use and opportunities for improvement. And then it's kind of a whole nother thing to like, a lot of the product role, and I'd love to get into this topic a little bit more. A lot of the product role is, you know, not using your own personal experience, but understanding a different kind of person's experience and anticipating what they might want or need. Um, and so this is something that I've always thought was interesting with your background, where, you know, in a lot of ways, there were probably lots of times where you could kind of reference your own experience, and you're not imagining, oh, what does a mechanical engineer need in this situation? You actually know because you were a mechanical engineer. So my question for you is like, reflecting on that, like, how do you think that helped you in your role at Xometry to be able to reference your own personal experience? And were there ever times where you felt potentially like limited by that, or that created a challenge in and of itself?
Yeah, for sure. Through that process of using the app, I didn't do it at the time, but I identified, 5 to 10 things that I would do to sort of up the instant quoting platform, which is what I ended up becoming the product manager for. And I ended up doing basically, or I ended up sort of creating the feature stories and working with the development team to release features that were, updates to the system that I was sort of wanting to make. So out of this list of 5 to 10 things, I ended up working through all of them. And then it became like, well, what next? And that's when I think what really always impressed me is that Xometry didn't have, at least in product and marketing, software developers, data scientists, the sort of like teams that I worked with a lot, there weren't very many, if any, people that had experience as a mechanical engineer or, manufacturing parts. There were plenty of mechanical engineers at Xometry on the operations team, but on kind of in our domain, it was a lot of sort of non-experts, and I certainly was not an expert, but a lot of people that knew very little about when coming into Xometry about the whole sort of market that we were serving. But I was so impressed with how basically people that have no idea about mechanical engineering and like what mechanical engineers may need, then coming in and learning through talking to customers and reading, content on the internet, asking questions. And so I was sort of inspired by a lot of that to try to take this sort of like beginner eyes, or I think that's what's called, first principles, dial it back to say, okay, let's pretend that like I don't know anything about this and just try to learn through talking to people. So I think it definitely helped in a lot of conversations, but I also think it, probably limited me in certain ways of not being able to see what I, didn't already know. I was just saying like I think one thing with like software development and startups is a lot of times something is not possible today, but then tomorrow some update to the app releases, and all of a sudden that thing that wasn't possible yesterday is possible today. And if you come back to ideas, sometimes it's easy to say, well, we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. And then the person asking kind of looks into it and it's like, well, actually, like, why not? Or why can't we do it? And all of a sudden it's like, well, and you're sort of defending this. We tried, but it didn't work. And so,
Yes.
now it will never work. And unlearning that, like, that things that didn't work in the past will continue to not work is like totally bogus in software
Yes,
development.
completely. We talk about that all the time. Like there's so many things that we have tried that didn't work, and it's hard to like it's a natural reaction to be like, "Oh, well, we tried it and it didn't work, so it would be a waste of time to try it again." But to your point, like oftentimes these are things that we tried years ago. The business is entirely different now. Like the way we might approach it could be totally different. So, like, yeah, that's something that is a bit of a mantra within Procurated now is just like not to write something off because we tried it one time and it didn't work. It's you never know kind of what new perspective might allow something to work. And I think the other point that you made that is interesting and I've seen in my experience is um, yes, Xometry had a number of people internally that had some good experience in terms of mechanical engineering and things like that, where I always felt very lucky to be able to, like, call up someone on the operations team and ask a question. And um, I think it can be super helpful. Um, it's also it can become a bit of a crutch sometimes, right? Where like if you feel like you work with people that are a proxy for your user, you might not actually pick up the phone and call your real users, and you can get a little bit of a warped perspective because you feel like you're getting user feedback, but you're still talking to people that are like a part of your bubble. And we have the same challenge at Procurated too, right? Like we've got some people that have had careers in government procurement, and it's incredibly helpful to have that subject matter expertise in house. But we also have to remember that like those people may not be like perfectly representative of the opinions of our users in mass. And so really remembering to like leverage that but not let that be everything is, I think, super important. Yeah. Um so you come in, you do this interview, you talk about the sous vide app, and you get the role. And you have this great career at Xometry and you move up. Could you share a little bit about just kind of like what what your role was when you started, how things evolved, and just like a little bit of just the quick story of like your career path during your 4.5 years at Xometry?
Yeah. So I the interview story that I like to share that's related to the last thing we were talking about is, having past experience with the market or product or whatever it is you're working on can be, you can have blinders and tunnel vision sometimes because your opinion is, if you value your own opinion a ton, then you can use the app and then make decisions based on your own opinion, which doesn't work as a product manager. But I think it's also really important to use, especially if you're interviewing for product, is to use the product in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes, obviously, that's not possible. If it's like an enterprise software or something, you need a business account. But if you can create an account and use the thing, I think it's super valuable. And so in the middle of the interview, I think one of the questions was, have you ever led a project where you've like been in charge of finding the manufacturer and getting quotes and et cetera? And I said, yeah, actually, I'm doing something similar. It's not necessarily a manufacturing process; it's a fabrication process. But also, I used on a past project, I used the Xometry app to buy a part, and we ended up not buying the part from Xometry. And I was like, that's just like N of one, but like I'd be happy to share my input as to why we didn't buy. And both the head of product and the CTO are like, Yes, yes. Tell us more. So I then proceeded to like basically point out all the negative things that I found in the app, and I was like, "This is a terrible idea. What am I doing?"
Come in here, trash the product.
And so I think that like that was actually, I feel like in hindsight, I want to say I heard that like until that point, I was not necessarily going to get the job. So my new advice in interviewing for product is to just use the product and tell them all the things you would change about it. But I guess that gets to that question about like, or what did you like and what would you change? So um, because of that conversation, I think I was placed on the instant quoting engine. I was the product manager for the instant quoting engine. And that was the customer facing platform that allowed engineers to upload and procurement officers, purchasers, anybody that needed to buy a physical part using a CAD model would create an account, log in, and upload to this platform, change the requirements based on the needs of the part, and then go to checkout and purchase. And so I became the product manager of that product. And then I don't know what it was, except that, a lot of times product management teams and startup structures are pretty flat. And so you might have like somebody leading product and then just a bunch of product managers underneath. And that's the way I think that works really well. And I think that's the way it should be. But at the same time, the one cool thing about startups is like a lot of times job titles are just sort of like nefarious. Maybe the pay isn't good at a startup, but they can give you a job title. And I think I had heard something like, if you're not working with military folks, they a lot of times in certain roles they move on after 2 years. Like they can never work the same job for more than 2 years, and that's like I think that's part of the government's
Yeah.
methodology. But basically, I'd heard something like if you're not progressing in your role every year, every 2 years or something, then you're stagnating.
Mhm.
So we didn't have any of these like other roles, and so I think when I was loving working at Xometry, I was having a ton of fun, and I wanted as much sort of impact as possible. And so I think after a while, I came to you and I basically presented this document. I think actually the base of the document was something my wife gave me from a previous conversation she had where she was asking for more responsibility. And I have to brush off the dust on that thing, but I believe it was a letter to you. Then, and it ends with, "I'm interested in taking more responsibility. If Let me know your thoughts and if you'd be willing to support that before you do anything else. If you would be interested in talking to me about it, that'd be really cool." I think you said sure. I said, "Well, I haven't had a chance to get all my thoughts together, but I'll follow up in a couple of days with what I'm thinking." And then the follow up was a letter. It was the proposed job description. It was then a list of things that I had accomplished over the past 12 months, and then my approach to how I would take on this new role. And so I was promoted at the time to this new role called a senior product manager, which existed elsewhere. It just didn't exist at Xometry at the time. And then similar, I think a little later, once again, just like I did as a mechanical engineer, Xometry had sort of three products at the time, which is basically like the instant quoting engine, the internal system that managed all the orders, and then the external job board that the manufacturers were using. And anything that we did on the instant quoting engine, and I think this is an important skill for product managers in mechanical engineering, they call it a systems engineer. And it's like, if you change something on the customer facing app, how does that percolate or propagate through the rest of the system? And so a lot of times I would work with the ERP team and then the job board team to make sure that the things that we were doing on the instant quoting engine propagated through the whole system. And I think later on we would say, no, the responsibility of integrating that falls on the different teams. And then that was, an interesting exercise to try to coordinate a single product across multiple product teams and multiple disciplines. But I I was interested in, all of these different platforms. I loved the partner platform. I think we called it the job board at the time. And I was interested in, helping out there if I could. And then we started working on a new product. Actually, I guess additional to the instant quoting engine, we had CAD add-ons for SolidWorks, and then eventually we had one for Inventor, which is the platform I used as a mechanical engineer. And so we had these like multiple apps, multiple add-ons.
Kind of like integration.
Yeah, it was like how can an engineer use Xometry's platform within their CAD software? And so I managed those as well. And so we were sort of growing our product suite on the customer side. And, I at the time, I was very interested in getting management experience. That was something I was sort of obsessed with from like day one. The thing about, I actually talked to my brother, the data scientist, about product management. And he's like, product management's cool because you get to manage, but you don't have to manage people. I think I later learned what he actually meant by that, but I kept wanting to manage people. And so I was trying to sort of figure out how I could maybe manage multiple products with product managers who managed the product, but then I was sort of the system level person, and those kind of rolled up. And so I ended up finishing as a group product manager, which is exactly that role of a couple different things. But yeah, that's how.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it kind of illustrates just how the needs of an organization can change, right? So like when you joined Xometry, I think it was like right before we closed our Series A. We were maybe 40 or 50 employees. And to your point, like as these companies grow and as the products grow, there's just a level of complexity. And I think that creates a lot of interesting opportunities for product people. And as someone who can kind of grow with the company and with the product itself, I think it's really smart, the way you kind of zeroed in on like, hey, I like this kind of systems thinking and looking across our entire platform and understanding the interconnectedness and thinking about it holistically and how can I leverage that in the role. I think that's a common need that emerges as a lot of these companies grow and become more complex.
Yeah. And I think that story sort of reminded me of something. I actually just did this exercise a couple days ago. It's called the 10-10-10 exercise. And the framing of why I'm talking about this story is that one of the things I learned through this process is the importance of, if you're going to sort of present a new role for yourself to an organization, you have to really think about how it improves the company. Like nobody really wants to care that you want more responsibility.
Right.
Like if we do this, then it simplifies your life, whoever your boss is. It simplifies your life and it's better for the company because X, Y, and Z. And, it's difficult to go up to somebody and say, hey, I want more responsibility. I want a new job title. I want to like continue to move up. And so anytime you have a difficult conversation looming, you could do this exercise, the 10-10-10 exercise. And it is, if I have this conversation or I do this thing I'm thinking of, how am I going to feel in the next 10 hours? A lot of times it's like nervous, scared, anxious, excited, proud of myself, etc. Then how am I going to feel in the next 10 months? So basically a year. And then how am I going to feel in the next 10 years? And I didn't do it at the time for these conversations, but the really cool thing about that exercise is that you basically say your feelings and other things. How's it going to affect my family? How's it going to affect my health? And whatever else you're interested in. And you give it basically a plus or minus, and you can kind of quickly see how this decision is either likely really going to help you in the long term, or it's not, or this exercise doesn't actually answer your question. So maybe you need more information before having the conversation or whatever. But once you have that, it gives you this roadmap to having that conversation. And in thinking about this example, again, we didn't necessarily have this conversation, but if you're going, like, if I'm coming to you, I think that document helped, but it's like, hey, I think, I'm loving life here. I want more responsibility. I want to keep learning and growing. But also, if I do this, then we're able to have effectively more product managers without the team growing. So the budget doesn't have to change, because if you're I'm willing to take on 3 different products, and I think I can handle it doing X, Y, and Z. So we can grow our whatever without necessarily growing the team, or whatever the case is. It's a good way to walk through that conversation.
Yeah, I remember that document, and I feel like I have wanted to like refer back to it at times to like help give guidance to other people that I've worked with on like, hey, if you want to move up within the organization, like this is a good kind of framework to use. And I do think that being proactive, thinking about what the business needs, I think is huge. A lot
Yeah.
of people, I think, do get a little too caught up in like, well, what do I want to do? And what you want is to find the overlap of like,
Yeah.
what do you want to do and what does the organization actually need? And that's the sweet spot.
Yeah. And also the last thing on that is, when you're talking to your boss, or, I've sort of learned this with any negotiation, is you want the other person to feel involved and like sort of the hero of the story. So like a good framing of the question is, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
Is this something you'd be willing to talk to me about? And, or is this something you'd be willing to like help me with? And then you go through the process. Okay, how are we going to present this to the team or to management? And then all of a sudden your boss becomes the we and potentially the hero of the story. And it's more about them, helping you than it is about you asking for some promotion or whatnot. So yeah, trying to get other people on board before you even come at this like, here's my new job and here's the X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z. It's like, this is a conversation you're even willing to have, and is
Yeah,
this
get
something
the
you're willing to
buy-in.
help me with? Yeah. So
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I love that. I love reflecting back kind of on that journey that you had at Xometry and the success you had there. I know we're running a little bit long, but I would like to make sure that we spend a little bit of time talking about your transition into. I find it funny to say becoming an entrepreneur because I think that you've been an entrepreneur all along, right? It's
thank you.
clear from how I think you think about things, and there's a thread of that throughout this entire story. But um, I would love if you could share a little bit of the kind of quick story of how you decided to, what sparked the idea for Llama Wood and how you decided to kind of take the leap and build this business that you've been building for what, last 2.5 years?
A little over 2 years.
Yeah.
So I loved the Xometry sort of model, because the benefit that you could bring to a marketplace, the efficiency you could bring to a marketplace by connecting a buyer with a seller and then managing the transaction and fulfillment all within a platform. It just was, like to say it was genius. I actually like would ask Randy, like, how did you think of this? This is so smart. And I remember feeling like, man, if somebody, like if Randy can come up with this idea, um, apparently off the cuff. No, that's not actually how it happened. But I was like, who am I to like think if I can start a business? Because this idea is so beyond anything I would have ever imagined. And I was just so impressed with it. But because of the value that it brought the partner network, I remember specifically this event that happened. I don't remember the year, but a hurricane or tornado hit Texas, I believe. And it just like demolished one of our suppliers. And a couple of things Xometry was able to do there is, number one is all of the jobs that had been matched to that supplier were able to get routed out to different sellers. And so the customers ended up getting their parts. And then I believe we did a GoFundMe campaign for that, that partner, and every other partner in the network, like, contributed to the rebuilding of this. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, this is so cool, because not only is this platform bringing jobs to this network, but it's also like created this giant manufacturing family. And that's a little bit like altruistic, but I just was with that sort of like, I want to start a company mindset. I kept applying this idea to a bunch of different industries. And that is, how do you connect buyers again, through a platform to a distributed network of sellers who can provide capacity on demand, elastic capacity, which is really important because certain things get in high demand at some points and low demand at other points. I can think of one, firewood. But so I thought, well, I could start a landscape business with a network of sellers. What about home building? And then I had heard this somewhere. I often attribute it to the wrong person, so I'll just leave it out. Is that when you think about starting a business, look at your credit card statement and figure out where you spend a disproportionate amount of your income. And so I was doing that, and I never really like highlighted anything as, oh, this is the thing. And it was mortgage and dining out. And I think that disproportionate, no, because a lot of people spend a lot of money on mortgage and dining out. But this thing about everywhere I went, every house that I went into, whether it was my house or somebody else's, I would pay whatever I needed to pay to make sure I could have wood burning fires inside and outside. And so I'd spent a lot of money on all things related to firewood and fires. And so that sort of helped me realize that like it's got to be something about fire. And then we lived in DC with neighbors of you, Becca. And then in 2000, in the middle of COVID, we decided to move to Richmond, and we got to Richmond, and we moved in July of 2020. And so the fall is coming up, and I want to buy firewood. I just know that it's going to be way easier to buy firewood in Richmond than it was in DC. And I went through the standard process of finding a guy, texting him. They tell you it's seasoned. They come over, they drop it off. You have to pay them in cash. This guy actually took Venmo, but like as he was leaving, I Venmo'd him, and then you have to put in the last 4 digits of their phone number. I'm like, wait.
Yeah.
I have since mailed checks. I mean, buying firewood I just hoped it was better in Richmond than it was in DC. And sure enough, it was like the exact same thing. And I think it was in that moment when that delivery sort of was botched and the wood was wet and it was too big. I needed to split it with an axe, which was a pain. I think I had like a 1.5-year-old at the time. I was anytime anytime they were not in my arms, I wanted to be like sitting on a couch or something. So I said, that's it. I am going to, could I build a network of firewood sellers and build a platform that connected buyers with that network? And then really the key there is that you then use technology to manage the quality of the seller. And since this idea of Xometry and my business is that it's a managed marketplace, it connects the orders with the sellers that are most qualified to perform the delivery. And one of the things that goes into that is the rating based on their past performance. And so the cream rises to the top. Eventually, you only start sending jobs to the best suppliers. And so I could provide a quality standard and a consistency to firewood delivery that, like in my experience, which was buying firewood across 5 different states, the consistency was really hard to find, and reliability was really hard to find. So that's kind of how it sparked the company I started, which is called Llama Wood.
That's awesome. And I'm sure hopefully there'll be an opportunity to do a whole episode in and of itself on the Llama Wood story. But the one question I wanted to ask, just kind of to close things out, is and kind of bring it back to our conversation about your career in product. Like, what product experience do you feel like helped you feel confident in starting your own business? Like, what are you thankful that you learned as a product manager that you've been able to put into use starting your own business?
I think the biggest thing is that as a product person, again, regardless of the product you manage, you sort of, it necessitates this system level thinking to where you have to learn about how your product impacts every aspect of the business: marketing, sales, operations, finance, admin. It doesn't matter. You're probably talking to one of those. I think like at one point, every person on the C-suite was a stakeholder of the instant quoting engine. And so you get especially if you do product at a small company or startup, you're going to get a ton of experience really fast. But now that I've started a business, I think the two critical things, especially early on, Y Combinator says this, and I think many others, is that as a founder or CEO of a company, early on, the two things that you need to focus on, because there's two things: building the product and selling. So you have to learn how to build and you have to learn how to sell. And basically both of those things is the like quintessential job requirement of a product manager. You have to figure out what the customers want, come up with the vision for how that is going to be built, and then you have to sell it to all these people, because
Right.
Sometimes what operations wants, sales, it's the operations wants a smoother flow, sales wants more orders, marketing wants more sessions, and top of funnel customers landing on the site or whatever. So you have to negotiate and work with all these different disciplines to sell this vision of a greater future. And so I think that being able to build something and sell it sort of at the same time, that whole like jump out of a plane without a parachute and figure it out
Mm-hmm.
on the way down, it kind of happens. And then you've touched on it too, is like this a huge thing. Like you just can't build a business without talking to customers and understanding what they truly want. Um, because I think what's the saying that like 80% of products that get launched don't get used. So you can think of a million features for an app, but in order to know which one you need to build next, you have to talk to a lot of people. Whether you're looking at like whether the talking is looking over user data, or actually speaking with the internal team, talking to the external customer, but picking up the phone and calling customers constantly, that too is a huge necessity as a product manager, and even more so as you're trying to build something, and selling it. So you learn as a product manager, you learn how to build and sell, and those are the two biggest skills. And actually, they say that selling is harder than building. So if you have to be good at one of them, get good at selling.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of practice with that as a product manager.
Yeah. It's such a good point, and I think it's sometimes an element of the product role that, well, at least from personal experience, I would say you can kind of resent, right? Like sometimes you're just like, I have this idea. Why doesn't everybody just like go along with it, right? Like this is my job to do this stuff. Like, and
Something you said, I don't know if you remember saying it, but I laugh at it all the time. I think about it constantly. Is you said that the job of a product manager is to gently disappoint people all day long.
it is like you have to just get so comfortable with telling people no, or just kind of like redirecting them to different ideas, or yes, I stand by that statement. But yeah, the sales part is hard, and it can be hard, especially depending on kind of the dynamics in the organization in which you're working, where you can be faced with a lot of strong opinions, and sometimes it's hard to convince people of an idea that you feel confident about.
Yep.
But to your point, like I hope that anyone who is experiencing that and maybe frustrated by that in their product roles tries to remember that it is such a valuable skill no matter what you do in your career. And yeah, builds character.
Exactly.
So all right. Well, I'm going to shorten our rapid fire wrap up questions to just one.
Okay.
Um, which I am curious to hear your answer, because I feel like you're always kind of reading something interesting or talking to someone interesting. So my question for you is, what book or person has been most influential in your career?
In my career,
Mm-hmm.
I was ready for most recently, but in my career, I'm also ready for. And if you know me, you've heard me say it. Tim Ferriss. It
Heard it.
started
I noticed you referenced him like right at the beginning.
at
And I was
least,
like,
yeah. If I think my brother says if you talk to Hunter and he hasn't mentioned Tim Ferriss within the first like 10 seconds, it's an anomaly. But yeah, the 4 Hour Work Week is like an incredible read, and I think it's super popular. So hopefully a lot of people reading or hearing this have already read it. But there's another thing is like, I don't always evangelize that book because the title 4 Hour Work Week sounds kind of cliche or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to figure out how to spend your time on things that are effective rather than trying to be efficient. I think like product management, this is huge. Entrepreneurial paths, this is huge. Is that you can constantly have things to do on your to-do list. And one thing I've learned is the more productive you are, the more things that you put on your to-do list. Like your to-do list will never get shorter, no matter what you try. And I've tried it all. And so figuring out the very few things that you need to do, the critical few versus the trivial many. And a major principle, actually just did an exercise like 2 days ago from that book is really the kind of two core principles are the 80-20 principle and then the Pareto principle. 80-20 is that 20% of your output comes from 80%. I'm sorry, 80% of your output comes from 20% of your input. 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your products, 20% of your customers. I mean, you can apply it to everything. And then Parkinson's law is that work will expand based on the time that you allot. So setting clear, short deadlines. If you have if you're going to be interviewed on a podcast and you want to, figure out how you might answer some questions, like give yourself like whatever, a short amount of time to do it, and then you'll get it done. Because if you give yourself a longer amount of time, the work will fill the time allotted.
Yeah.
And so that along with his podcasts and the last thing that I'll say about these books is that they have the 4 Hour Work Week and other books of his and other business books that I've read. If they have a playbook, like do this, then this, then this, that really resonates with me. And in the 4 Hour Work Week, there are these things called comfort challenges that you do. And I've done every single one of them. And like I always say, anytime I do anything from this book, like almost exactly what he says will happen happens. I had a problem early on, actually, I still do, where I take some of his advice out of order. And so if you read the 4 Hour Work Week, he has a structure for how you are going to become more productive and free yourself to work on the things you love and do the things you love outside of work. And so the last thing in the book is to take a sabbatical, or he calls them mini retirements. And I was like, I'll just skip the first 3 steps and go straight to the sabbatical. But he actually pointed out, and in another book he mentions in that book multiple times, this book called Vagabonding by Rolf Potts. And it's that like taking these long trips, you learn some of these skills you learn and these things that you acquire through travel will have a bigger impact on your life than whatever you would have done at work for that same 7-week period.
Absolutely.
And so that single book has launched me into an unlimited number of future books that are then recommended by people he's interviewed on the podcast and whatnot. So hands down, Tim Ferriss.
No surprise there. I love it. I'm going to start thinking about scheduling a sabbatical.
I actually, I've written out sort of an outline of the process from coming up with the idea all the way to pulling it off, so I can share that with you. And also the document that I shared with you when I was asking for new role. I can share that with you as well.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. Thank you. So much good stuff today. Thank you so much, Hunter. I appreciate your time, and I always love your thoughts, your perspective, your attitude, your energy, all of it. So thank you for being on the show. It was really fun talking to you.
Thanks for having me. I had a blast and would be happy to come back anytime.
Awesome.